Grandma, Mom said you're not supposed to know about the papers. Those were the first full words my grandson Noah had spoken to me in nearly 3 years, and for a moment, I honestly thought I had imagined them. The hallway outside my son's dining room felt too quiet after the family gathering. Plates still clinked softly in the kitchen while Vanessa laughed at something on her phone, her voice bright and polished in the way it always became around other people. Michael was helping carry leftovers to the refrigerator, pretending everything in our family was normal. But Noah stood beside the staircase, gripping the sleeve of my cardigan with tiny trembling fingers, his pale blue eyes fixed on the floor like he regretted speaking the moment the words left his mouth. I lowered myself carefully onto the bench near the front door, my knees aching from the cold November rain outside. "What papers, sweetheart?" I asked softly. Noah's breathing became uneven. He looked over his shoulder toward the kitchen, and I noticed fear in his face. Real fear. Not the kind children feel after a nightmare or a loud thunderstorm. This was the kind of fear that comes from hearing things children were never supposed to hear. He opened his mouth again, but before he could speak, Vanessa appeared in the hallway carrying a stack of dessert plates. "Noah," she said quickly, her smile tightening when she saw him standing so close to me. "You know you're supposed to wait in the car." He immediately stepped backward, his shoulders folded inward like a flower closing at sunset. I had seen that reaction too many times before. Vanessa laughed lightly, though her eyes never softened. "He gets overwhelmed after family dinners," she explained to me. "The therapist says too much stimulation makes him anxious." I nodded slowly, but my attention stayed on Noah. He wasn't looking at his mother. He was looking at me. And in that brief moment before Vanessa guided him toward the garage door, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Desperation. The drive home felt longer than usual. Rain slid across my windshield in silver ribbons while the windshield wipers clicked back and forth in a tired rhythm. My small house sat 20 miles outside Portland in a quiet neighborhood filled with maple trees that had already lost most of their leaves. Harold and I bought that house 41 years ago when Michael was still in elementary school. Back then, our biggest worry was whether we could afford new kitchen cabinets before Christmas. I never imagined that growing older would feel like slowly becoming invisible inside your own family. Inside the house, I hung my coat carefully beside the door and stood in silence for several seconds. The living room lamp cast a warm golden glow across the old hardwood floors, but the warmth didn't reach me tonight. Noah's words kept replaying in my head. "You're not supposed to know about the papers." Papers. My chest tightened suddenly as memories began surfacing one after another. Vanessa insisting I sign insurance forms after Harold passed away. Michael avoiding eye contact whenever finances came up. Missing folders in my office drawer. Small things I had dismissed because trusting your family feels more natural than questioning them. I walked slowly to my desk near the window and opened the bottom drawer. At first, everything looked normal. Tax envelopes, utility bills, old birthday cards from Noah back when he still liked drawing dinosaurs for me with green crayons. But then I noticed an empty space near the back where my property documents used to sit. My fingers froze against the wood. I knew with absolute certainty that I had left them there last spring. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass while the house settled around me with familiar creaks. And for the first time since Harold died, I felt something colder than loneliness settling quietly into my chest. Suspicion. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Noah standing in the hallway with his small hands trembling against my sweater sleeve. The image stayed with me until sunrise. Around 6:30 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and walked into the kitchen wearing Harold's old gray cardigan over my nightgown. The house felt colder than usual. Oregon mornings in November always carried a damp chill that settled into the walls before dawn. I filled the kettle with water and stood at the sink while the coffee maker sputtered softly beside me. Outside, the maple tree in my front yard swayed under steady rain. Most of its leaves had already fallen across the driveway in faded shades of orange and red. Harold used to rake them every Thanksgiving weekend while Michael helped him pile them near the curb. Back then, our family still felt simple. Honest. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug and tried convincing myself I was overreacting. Maybe Noah misunderstood something. Maybe the missing papers had a harmless explanation. But deep down, another voice kept whispering the same uncomfortable truth. Children do not become frightened for no reason. especially quiet children. Noah had not always been silent. When he was little, he used to talk endlessly about dinosaurs, baseball cards, and outer space. At 4 years old, he followed me through grocery stores asking hundreds of questions about everything he saw. Then slowly, after Vanessa began homeschooling him during the pandemic, something changed. His voice became softer, then rarer. By age 8, he barely spoke during family gatherings at all. Vanessa always explained it away with polished confidence. He is sensitive. He gets overstimulated. The therapist says we should not pressure him socially. Michael nodded along every time like a man too exhausted to argue anymore. At first, I believed her because mothers are supposed to know their children best. But over the years, I started noticing small things that did not sit right with me. Noah flinching whenever Vanessa raised her voice. The way he constantly watched adults before speaking, as though measuring whether his words were safe. The fact that he relaxed more around strangers than around his own parents. I carried my coffee into the office beside the living room and sat carefully at Harold's old desk. The empty spot in the drawer still bothered me. I pulled out every folder one by one, stacking them neatly across the carpet. Insurance records, bank statements, property tax receipts. Everything appeared organized except for the documents related to the house. Those were gone completely. My stomach tightened. I knew I had not misplaced them. Harold taught me decades ago to keep originals in one location and never move them unnecessarily. Paperwork matters, he used to say. One signature can change your entire life. Around 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Thank you again for dinner last night. Noah had such a nice time with you. I stared at the message for several seconds. Something about it felt rehearsed. Too polished. I typed back a simple heart emoji and nothing else. A minute later, another message appeared. By the way, Michael and I were thinking maybe we could stop by this weekend to discuss some future planning stuff. Just adult responsibilities and paperwork. The word paperwork made my chest go cold. I set the phone down slowly on the desk and looked toward the rain-covered window. Then, for the first time in many years, I opened Harold's old leather address book and searched for the number of the attorney who handled our estate planning. Martin Green answered on the third ring. His voice sounded older than I remembered, rough around the edges like worn leather, but still calm and steady in a way that instantly brought back memories of sitting beside Harold during long meetings about retirement plans and property taxes. Evelyn, he said with quiet surprise. It has been a long time. I looked down at my hands resting on Harold's desk. I hope I am not bothering you, I said. Not at all. Is everything all right? For a moment, I almost said yes. Habit, I suppose. Women my age spend decades telling people we are fine, even when something inside us is quietly collapsing. But this time, the word would not come out. I think I need to ask you about some paperwork, I said carefully. Silence filled the line for a second. Then his voice lowered slightly. What kind of paperwork? I explained about the missing property documents and the forms Vanessa had asked me to sign several months earlier. As I spoke, I heard the subtle shift in Martin's breathing. Not panic. Concern. Professional concern. Do you still have copies? He asked. I do not think so. Did anyone witness you signing these papers? Michael was there, I answered softly. Saying my son's name out loud made something ache inside my chest. Martin sighed very quietly. Evelyn, I would feel more comfortable if you came into my office tomorrow morning. Bring whatever records you still have. Do you think something is wrong? I asked. He paused too long before answering. I think it is better not to discuss details over the phone. After we hung up, I sat motionless for nearly 5 minutes staring at the rain outside my office window. Somewhere down the street, a lawn mower hummed despite the weather. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life continuing while something inside my own family shifted into focus piece by piece. Around noon, I drove to the grocery store for a few things I did not really need. Milk, bread, a can of tomato soup. I mostly wanted to clear my head. The parking lot smelled like wet pavement and pine trees after the rain. Inside, early Christmas decorations already lined the aisles even though Thanksgiving was still 2 weeks away. Artificial snow, red ribbons, plastic ornaments stacked beneath fluorescent lights. I used to love this time of year. Harold would tease me for decorating too early, while Michael helped untangle lights in the garage. Noah loved helping too when he was younger. He used to stand on a kitchen chair beside me making crooked sugar cookies with too much frosting. I had not baked with him in over 2 years. Halfway through the cereal aisle, I heard a familiar voice behind me. Grandma. I turned quickly. Noah stood several feet away beside the shopping cart, while Vanessa compared yogurt containers nearby. He looked startled to see me there, but not unhappy. His dark green raincoat hung loosely around his small frame, and his blonde hair curled slightly from the damp weather outside. I smiled gently. Hi, sweetheart. He glanced nervously toward his mother before walking closer. I liked your mashed potatoes yesterday, he whispered. My heart tightened. Such a small sentence, yet hearing his voice again felt almost unreal. Thank you, I said softly. I miss talking with you. Noah lowered his eyes. Mom says talking causes problems sometimes. The words landed harder than they should have. Before I could answer, Vanessa suddenly appeared beside us with her polished smile already in place. There you are, she said brightly to Noah, resting a manicured hand on his shoulder. You wandered off again. Then she looked at me. Michael and I are still planning to stop by Sunday, by the way. We really need to organize some things before tax season. Organize some things. The phrase sounded harmless. Practical. But this time I noticed something underneath it. Pressure. Noah slowly reached for the card again, but as Vanessa turned away, he looked back at me one last time. Then, barely moving his lips, he whispered 4 words that made my blood run cold. Do not sign anything else. The rain finally stopped sometime during the night, but the next morning the sky still hung low and gray over Portland like a heavy wool blanket. I arrived at Martin Green's office 15 minutes early, carrying a manila folder filled with every financial record I could find in the house. The building smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, exactly the same way it had 10 years ago when Harold and I updated our will after Michael got married. Back then, we sat side by side in the waiting room holding hands while arguing softly about whether Harold spent too much money on fishing equipment. I remember thinking growing old together felt safe. Predictable. I had no idea how quickly safety could disappear after one funeral. Martin greeted me personally at the front desk. His silver hair had thinned considerably since I last saw him, but his expression remained sharp and observant. He led me into his office without much small talk. That alone unsettled me. Lawyers who are comfortable usually talk too much. Lawyers who are worried become quiet. I sat across from him while he adjusted his reading glasses and slowly reviewed the papers I brought. The ticking clock on his bookshelf sounded unusually loud in the silence. Finally, he folded his hands together and looked directly at me. Evelyn, he said carefully, do you remember signing any property transfer authorization forms within the last year? My throat tightened. Vanessa told me they were insurance updates after Harold passed away. Martin nodded once, very slowly, then opened a file drawer beside his desk. He removed several photocopied pages and placed them in front of me. At first, I did not fully understand what I was looking at. Legal terminology, signatures, notary stamps. But then I saw my own name near the bottom of the page beside a sentence that made my stomach drop. Temporary durable power of attorney. Another page authorized partial access to my retirement accounts for financial management purposes. A third document listed Michael as future transfer beneficiary on the house. My hands began shaking against the desk. I never agreed to this, I whispered. Martin's expression softened slightly. I believe you. I stared at my signature. The handwriting was mine, but I barely remembered signing any of it. Vanessa had brought over stacks of papers 3 months after Harold's death, while I was still grieving so heavily some mornings I forgot whether I had eaten breakfast. She sat beside me at the kitchen table, speaking gently about paperwork deadlines and legal requirements. Michael had been there too, standing near the refrigerator scrolling through his phone while nodding distractedly whenever Vanessa explained something. I remembered feeling embarrassed for not understanding the documents faster. I remembered apologizing repeatedly for being forgetful. Martin leaned back quietly. None of these transfers are finalized yet, he said. But someone has clearly been preparing for long-term control over your assets. The word control echoed inside my chest. Not support. Not protection. Control. I looked toward the office window where weak sunlight pushed through the clouds for the first time all week. Did Michael know? I asked softly. Martin hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than the answer itself. His signature appears as witness on 2 forms. Something inside me cracked then. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a small, quiet fracture somewhere deep in the place where mothers keep faith in their children. I lowered my eyes to the paperwork again, suddenly remembering dozens of little moments I had ignored over the past year. Vanessa insisting on organizing my mail. Michael encouraging me to simplify my finances. The repeated conversations about retirement communities outside Seattle. Even Noah's strange silence whenever adults discussed the future around him. Children always know when something feels wrong before adults are willing to admit it. Martin slid the papers gently back into the folder. I strongly advise you not to sign anything else, he said. And until we sort this out, do not tell them you came to see me. I nodded slowly, but deep down I already understood something far more painful than the paperwork itself. The real betrayal in my family had started long before signatures appeared on those pages. The hardest part was pretending nothing had changed. By Sunday afternoon, I had already memorized every page Martin gave me and locked copies inside the small fireproof box Harold used to keep in the bedroom closet. I also moved the remaining financial records into the safe deposit box at my bank that morning before church. The young teller smiled politely while helping me complete the paperwork, completely unaware that she was witnessing a woman quietly reclaiming control over her own life. I did not feel dramatic. I did not feel powerful. Mostly, I felt tired. Tired in the deep way only betrayal can make a person feel. Around 4 o'clock, Michael's SUV pulled into my driveway. I watched through the living room curtains as Vanessa stepped out first wearing a cream-colored wool coat and carrying a bakery box tied with a red ribbon. She always brought desserts when she needed something. Michael followed behind her with his hands buried inside his jacket pockets while Noah climbed slowly from the back seat. The moment he looked toward the house, his expression tightened slightly, as though he already sensed something important was happening tonight. I opened the front door before they reached the porch. "It smells wonderful in here," Vanessa said warmly as she walked inside. She leaned forward to kiss my cheek, and for the first time I noticed how carefully practiced all her gestures were. Even her smile seemed measured now. Michael hugged me next. His embrace felt distracted. Brief. "How have you been?" "Mom," he asked. "Busy," I answered calmly. His eyes flickered toward me for half a second, almost searching for something. Fear, maybe. Suspicion. But I simply stepped aside and invited them in. Dinner passed with strained normalcy. I served roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans while Vanessa filled every silence with cheerful conversation about school schedules, rising grocery prices, and holiday travel plans. Michael mostly nodded while staring down at his plate. Noah barely touched his food. Several times, I caught him watching Vanessa with nervous caution before lowering his eyes again. Halfway through dessert, Vanessa finally placed her fork down carefully and smiled at me across the table. "Actually," she said lightly, "there was something Michael and I wanted to discuss with you." There it was. I folded my napkin slowly into my lap. "Of course." Michael cleared his throat, but did not speak. Vanessa continued smoothly. "We have been thinking a lot about your future lately. This house is beautiful, Evelyn, but it is also a lot for one person to manage alone." The words sounded almost identical to conversations we had already shared during the past year, except tonight I could finally hear the strategy underneath them. Repetition, gradual pressure. Make the idea feel reasonable enough times, and eventually the person stops resisting it. "We found a wonderful retirement community outside Seattle," Vanessa continued. "Private cottages, walking trails, medical staff nearby. It would really simplify things for you." Simplify things. Another harmless phrase carrying a sharp edge beneath it. I took a small sip of coffee before answering. "I am not planning to leave my home." Silence settled briefly across the table. Vanessa blinked once, clearly surprised by how directly I answered. Michael shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Mom," he said carefully, "we are just trying to help." I looked at my son then. Really looked at him. The dark circles beneath his eyes. The exhaustion in his posture. Harold used to say Michael avoided conflict so intensely that stronger personalities always swallowed him whole. Back then, I thought it was kindness. Now I wondered if it was weakness. Vanessa reached into her purse and removed a slim folder. "Actually," she said with a soft laugh, "there are just a few updated documents we thought we could go over tonight. Nothing complicated." Across the table, Noah suddenly went still. Completely still. His fork slipped from his hand onto the plate with a sharp metallic sound that made everyone look toward him. His face had gone pale. For a moment, nobody moved. The sound of Noah's fork hitting the plate seemed to echo unnaturally loud through the dining room. Vanessa turned toward him immediately, her smile tightening at the corners. "Noah," she said softly, though there was warning hidden beneath the sweetness in her voice. "Pick up your fork, sweetheart." But Noah did not move. He was staring directly at the folder in Vanessa's hands as if it frightened him. Michael noticed it too. "Buddy, are you all right?" he asked carefully. Noah swallowed hard without answering. I had spent years watching that child shrink into silence at family gatherings. But tonight something looked different. Not emptiness. Conflict. Like he was holding words inside himself that had become too heavy to carry anymore. Vanessa laughed lightly and reached over to smooth his hair. "He is tired," she explained quickly. "School has been stressful lately." Then she slid the folder toward me across the table. "Anyway, these are just updated authorization forms. Totally routine." I looked down at the papers without touching them. The top page carried several highlighted tabs already marked with yellow sticky notes. "Sign here. Initial here." Simple instructions prepared in advance. My chest felt strangely calm now, almost detached. "I think I would rather review these with my attorney first," I said quietly. The reaction was immediate. Vanessa's hand froze against her wine glass. Michael looked up sharply from his plate. Even Noah's eyes widened slightly. "Attorney?" Vanessa repeated with a small laugh. "Evelyn, there is really no need for that. These are standard estate planning forms." "I am sure they are," I answered calmly. But Harold always preferred having legal review before signatures. Michael rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "Mom, Vanessa already spent a lot of time organizing everything." Organizing everything. Another phrase designed to sound caring while quietly removing control from someone else. I folded my hands neatly in my lap. "Then I am sure waiting a few more days will not hurt anyone." Silence settled heavily across the table again. Outside, wind rattled softly against the dining room windows while the grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily towards 7 o'clock. Vanessa finally smiled again, but the warmth had disappeared from her face entirely now. "Of course," she said smoothly. "We just thought we were helping." Helping. Such a gentle word. I used to believe people who manipulate others always sounded cruel or aggressive. But real manipulation often arrives wrapped in concern, in patience, in carefully rehearsed kindness. Noah suddenly pushed his chair backward. "Can I go upstairs?" he whispered. Vanessa looked irritated for the first time all evening. "You have barely eaten." "My stomach hurts." Michael glanced toward his son with concern. Maybe he should lie down for a few minutes. Vanessa hesitated, clearly wanting him to remain at the table, but finally nodded. "Fine, but do not snoop around your grandmother's office again." The sentence slipped out so naturally that nobody reacted at first. Then my heartbeat slowed almost painfully inside my chest. Noah looked horrified. Vanessa seemed to realize her mistake immediately. "I just mean he wanders sometimes," she added quickly with a strained laugh. "You know how curious children are." But I was no longer listening to her explanation. I was watching Noah. His face had gone completely pale. He stood there frozen beside the table, eyes lowered toward the floor like a child waiting for punishment. Then slowly, almost invisibly, he shook his head once. Not at me, at her. That tiny movement told me more than any legal document ever could. Michael stood up halfway from his chair, confusion flickering across his face. "Wait," he said slowly. "What do you mean snooping around the office?" Vanessa answered too quickly. "Nothing. Honestly, Michael, you are overthinking this." But something had already shifted in the room. I could feel it. The carefully controlled atmosphere Vanessa maintained around our family had cracked just enough for the truth underneath to start showing through. The rest of dinner unraveled slowly after that. Not dramatically, not loudly, just small fractures spreading quietly through the room while everyone pretended things were still normal. Vanessa became overly cheerful, the way people do when they are trying to smooth over tension too quickly. She started talking about holiday decorations and ski trips in Colorado while stacking dessert plates with nervous precision. Michael barely responded anymore. His eyes kept drifting toward the hallway upstairs where Noah had disappeared. I could see confusion building inside him now, uncomfortable and slow. Like a man waking up from a long sleep and realizing furniture has been moved around while he was unconscious. Around 7:30, Michael finally excused himself to check on Noah. The moment he disappeared upstairs, Vanessa's smile vanished completely. She stood at the sink rinsing dishes while keeping her back turned toward me. I hope you are not misunderstanding our intentions, she said after a long silence. Her tone remained calm, but colder now, more direct. I folded a kitchen towel carefully beside the counter. I am not misunderstanding anything anymore. She stopped moving for a second. Just 1 second. Then the water resumed running. Michael worries about you, she replied. You are alone here. This house is expensive. You forget things sometimes. There it was again. That word. Forget. I remembered suddenly how often Vanessa used it around other people. Little comments slipped casually into conversations. Evelyn gets forgetful lately. Evelyn already signed that. She probably just forgot. At first they sounded harmless, even caring. But now I understood the pattern. Repeat something enough times, and eventually it becomes truth in other people's minds. I looked around my kitchen slowly. The pale yellow walls Harold painted himself 15 years ago. The old wooden fruit bowl Noah made for me in 2nd grade during art class. The coffee stains near the stove from decades of Sunday breakfasts. Forgetful people do not maintain a house like this alone at 70 years old. Forgetful people do not remember every birthday, every medication refill, every mortgage payment for 40 years. You know, I said quietly, Harold always warned me that the most dangerous kind of manipulation sounds reasonable at first. Vanessa turned around then. Her expression remained composed, but her eyes hardened slightly. I think you are being unfair. Am I? For the first time since Harold died, I did not lower my voice to keep the peace. I did not apologize for discomfort. I simply stood there calmly holding her gaze. Upstairs, faint footsteps creaked across the hallway floorboards. Vanessa glanced upward briefly before stepping closer to me. Evelyn, she said softly, you have no idea how stressful it has been trying to manage everything lately. Michael works constantly. Noah has emotional issues. We are trying to build stability for our family. Stability. Another beautiful word hiding ugly intentions underneath. By taking my house. I asked quietly. Her face changed then. Not dramatically, but enough. The kindness disappeared completely for one unguarded moment, revealing something colder beneath it. Calculation. Exhaustion. Resentment. Nobody is taking anything, she replied tightly. We are trying to think ahead because eventually difficult decisions will need to be made. Eventually. As if my life had already become a problem waiting for management. Before I could answer, Michael returned downstairs alone. Noah locked himself in the guest room. He said uneasily. He will not talk to me. Vanessa immediately moved toward the staircase. I will handle it. But Michael caught her wrist gently before she could pass. It was a small gesture. Quiet. Yet I could feel the entire atmosphere shift again. No, he said slowly. I think maybe I should talk to him by myself. Vanessa stared at him in surprise. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Michael released her wrist and headed upstairs alone. The silence he left behind felt heavier than any argument. Nearly 20 minutes passed before Michael came back downstairs. By then, the kitchen had fallen into an uncomfortable silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock above the stove. Vanessa stood near the sink, gripping the edge of the counter, so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. I remained seated at the table with my untouched coffee growing cold beside me. When Michael finally appeared in the doorway, something about his face looked older. Not physically older, just worn down in a way I had never noticed before. He looked at Vanessa first. He is crying, he said quietly. Vanessa crossed her arms immediately. Well, maybe if people stopped putting strange ideas into his head. No, Michael interrupted softly. That single word changed the atmosphere in the room more than shouting ever could have. Vanessa blinked in surprise. I did too. Michael rarely interrupted anyone, especially not her. He rubbed both hands over his face slowly before speaking again. He asked me if Grandma was going to disappear after she signed the papers. The silence that followed felt almost unreal. Vanessa laughed once, short and nervous. That is ridiculous. He misunderstood something. Michael looked directly at her now. Did he? Upstairs, faint footsteps creaked across the hallway floor. A moment later, Noah appeared at the top of the staircase wearing gray socks and clutching the sleeve of his oversized sweatshirt tightly in one hand. His eyes were red from crying. The sight of him standing there so small and frightened made my chest ache in a way I could barely describe. Vanessa immediately softened her voice. Honey, come downstairs. Everything is fine. But Noah did not move. He looked only at Michael. "Dad," he whispered shakily, "I do not want Grandma to leave." Michael stared at him in confusion. Nobody said Grandma was leaving. Noah's breathing became uneven again. He looked toward Vanessa for one terrified second before lowering his eyes. "Mom did." Vanessa's face drained of color. "Noah," she said sharply, "that is enough." He flinched so hard at her tone that Michael instinctively stepped forward. "Vanessa," he said quietly, "stop." Another silence fell. Heavy. Suffocating. Then something happened that I do not think any of us expected. Noah started talking. Not in short whispers. Not in frightened little fragments. The words poured out of him all at once like a dam finally breaking after years of pressure. "Mom said Grandma forgets things now," he cried. "She said if Grandma signs the papers we can move into this house, because it is worth more money. She said old people get confused and lawyers make everything difficult." Vanessa took a step forward. "Noah, you do not understand." "I heard you," he shouted suddenly. The sound stunned all of us. I had never heard Noah raise his voice before in his life. Tears streamed down his face now. "I heard you talking on the phone. You said Dad would never fight you because he feels guilty about Grandpa dying before fixing the will." Michael's face went completely still. Vanessa opened her mouth, but no words came out. Noah looked at me then, crying openly now. "I did not want them to send you away," he whispered. "I thought if I stayed quiet, maybe Mom would stop being mad all the time." My heart broke completely in that moment. Not because of the paperwork, not because of the house, but because a 10-year-old child had been carrying fear that should never belong to a child at all. Michael slowly turned toward Vanessa like a man seeing a stranger for the first time. "Tell me he is wrong," he said quietly. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. "Michael, do not do this in front of him. Tell me he is wrong." The kitchen felt frozen around us. Outside, rain began falling again against the dark windows while Noah stood trembling on the staircase. The quietest child in our family finally saying the things none of the adults had been brave enough to face. Nobody spoke for several seconds after Noah finished crying. The rain tapped steadily against the kitchen windows while the grandfather clock in the hallway continued its slow, patient ticking, as though time itself had decided to keep moving no matter how badly our family was breaking apart inside that room. Vanessa looked trapped now. Not angry, not dramatic, just exposed. The polished confidence she carried for years had vanished completely, leaving behind a woman who suddenly seemed exhausted from maintaining too many lies at once. Michael leaned both hands against the counter beside him and lowered his head. I had never seen my son look so defeated. "Did you really say those things?" he asked quietly. Vanessa opened her mouth twice before answering. "Michael, I was trying to protect our future." He let out a hollow laugh that barely sounded human. "By taking my mother's house. That is not what this was." "Then what was it?" Her eyes filled with frustrated tears. "You said yourself we were drowning financially. Your father left nothing organized. The medical bills kept piling up. This house is worth nearly $900,000, and she is alone here." She gestured toward me helplessly. "I thought eventually it would belong to us anyway." Eventually. There was that word again. As though my life had already been measured and scheduled like an inconvenience waiting for expiration. Michael stared at her silently for a long moment. Then he asked the question that mattered most. "Did you manipulate those documents on purpose?" Vanessa looked away. That was answer enough. Upstairs, the heating system clicked softly through the vents while Noah remained frozen halfway down the staircase, still wiping tears from his face with trembling hands. I stood up slowly from the table and walked toward him. Every eye in the room followed me, but I only focused on my grandson. When I reached the stairs, I knelt carefully despite the ache in my knees and held out my hand. Noah stared at me uncertainly before stepping down into my arms. The moment I hugged him, his entire body collapsed against me with exhausted relief. "I am sorry," he whispered into my sweater. "I should have told you sooner." I closed my eyes tightly for a second. "No, sweetheart," I said softly. "You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how." Behind us, Michael finally spoke again. His voice sounded quieter now, older somehow. "Mom," he said carefully. I did not know how far things had gone. I turned toward him while still holding Noah close beside me. Part of me wanted to ask how he could possibly not know, how he missed the signs, how he let his own child become afraid inside his own home. But another part of me saw the truth clearly now. Weakness creates silence just as easily as cruelty does. Michael had spent years avoiding conflict, while Vanessa slowly took control of every uncomfortable conversation in their lives. I believe you did not see it clearly, I answered honestly. But that does not mean it did not happen. Vanessa sat down heavily at the kitchen table and covered her face with both hands. For the first time since entering my home, she looked small, human, not powerful, just deeply lost inside her own ambition and fear. Nobody yelled after that. There was no dramatic ending, no shattered dishes, no cruel speeches, just exhaustion settling quietly over all of us. Around 9 o'clock, Michael gathered Noah's jacket and car keys in silence. Before leaving, he stopped beside me near the front door. "I am going to fix this," he said softly. I looked at my son for a long moment. Then I nodded once. "I hope you do." After they left, the house became still again. I made chamomile tea and carried 2 mugs onto the back porch, even though only one of us remained there. Rainwater glistened across the wooden steps beneath the porch light, while cold November air drifted through the trees behind the yard. A few minutes later, I noticed something folded carefully beneath Noah's empty teacup. It was a small crayon drawing torn from a notebook page. A picture of our house, me standing beside him on the porch. And underneath, written in shaky, uneven handwriting, were 5 simple words. "Grandma stays here with me." I sat there for a very long time staring at those words while the rain finally began to slow. And somewhere deep inside the silence surrounding me, I realized the quietest voice in our family had been telling the truth